Another long weekend adventure planned by Alastair, this time to ride the St James Trail. An afternoon ferry ride, evening drive to Hanmer Springs, and a night in his sister's Airbnb meant we had a full day to knock off the ride, and a second day to ride the single tracks around Hanmer before getting to those famous hot pools. Up early, we drove an hour on a rough road better suited to four-wheel drives to get to the start. The day was just perfect and little time was lost snapping photos before we started pedalling. We knew there was a bridge out, but a conversation with the dock ranger had informed us you can ford the river, sometimes. So we backed our adventure schools, rolled the dice and set off. 6.5k of a not too difficult climbing warmed us up for a descent with 70 km/h speeds, with jumps. Everyone held it together, although I had a moment where I was riding in the drain instead of on the track. As we rolled on, we all commented on how much of a rip snorter that had been and how glad we were not to be riding the other way. The St James is pretty epic country, but it isn't single track goodness. Rather, it's an incredibly varied and proper backcountry adventure on an unworn path. You're following a river, and while I thought we were heading back towards Hanmer Springs, it's entirely possible we were actually pressing further into the landscape, away from the small pocket of people that make up the town. You're just a speck in the landscape, swallowed whole and laying in the belly of the horizon. First lunch was on a side track to Lake Guyon in a hut with incredible views and a lake. It would have been a great place to stay, but we had plans to be back at Hanmer Springs eating a big meal and good time tonight. Standing at the point where the missing bridge once stood, the river looked keen to not let us through. This didn't stop us optimistically spending 2 hours and 2 kilometres bush bashing and walking our bars on the lumpy river rocks looking for a crossing point. Everywhere was both too deep and too swift for us to give any serious consideration to attempting to cross. This wasn't of course before we'd waded in, fighting to stay balanced without our bikes, and still not making it to the swiftest channel of the river. Reluctantly we gave up, turned around and silently started riding back towards the downhill section we had all loved so much but were now thinking about with very different superlatives. Two of the group announced they didn't think they could make it back. Food was rationed and distributed as we continued backwards, knowing the hill with that 20% gradient was going to be kinder and safer than the river. Soon after this the group split in half and underwent additional rationing, this time of lights. I rode at the front so I could go at my own pace, but this didn't last long as Wayne and Tony were either physically or mentally stronger, perhaps both. It was a stunningly clear evening and we probably had the best view in the world of the stars and the longest eclipse in 800 years, and climbing that hill felt just as long. The final descent had warmed us when we rode it in the morning. Now in the coolness of dusk at altitude, our body temperatures dropped as far and as fast as the elevation. Shaking uncontrollably, we struggled to get bikes on the car. Pulling into the house around 9:30 and well after all the shops had closed meant we had to eat most of what was supposed to be breakfast in the morning. This was panned out by some chips we managed to get from the only pub with the kitchen still open. The second group, having faced a couple of punches, a shortage of light, pulled in a little after midnight, and we all sat round the table telling stories of the long climb, final descent undertaken by the light of a smartphone, and the incredible blood moon eclipse. Now warm and full, a few of us mused about riding in from the other end in the morning to complete the ride. With everyone making it out, I guess it demonstrates how far our physical limits exceed our mental ones. This is especially true when you have no option. If anyone had chosen to stop on the way out, they would have had a cold, uncomfortable night and no breakfast waiting before they would have had to get up and get themselves out. After breakfast on Saturday, a smaller group of us set off to ride in from the other end and attempt to connect the ride. Two smaller hills saw us overtake motorbikes on the downs, but we passed on the ups. A dozen river crossings came next before a bridge, a climb and a descent before we looked down to the river that couldn't be crossed. Happy knowing we had connected our rides, we turned around to ride back to the hot pools of Hanmer, an enormous curry and a desire to return once the bridge is replaced to complete the ride just once, not twice, from beginning to end, all on the same day.